Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Track Records with your hosts, Kenny and Barry. And let's get the party started. So, Barry, I was thinking about something we were talking about earlier, which is when you were talking about bands like Air and Stereolab and Clinic, and I was asking like certain songs you liked off each album, and you said now with Air I understand they sing in French and that's different, but you were saying that you couldn't really name songs, somewhat due to like they're being unusually named or just general, and it got me to thinking because I thought about you and how you listen to music, and I thought about me and how I listen to music, and I wonder if you really like I don't know the best way of saying this. If you like music or sound more, and I like songs more, do you ever
Uh,
put on an album and just listen to a track or two and then take off that side?
do I?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
never.
And so I think that's a big difference between us. And so when I think about albums, I'm thinking about like what songs do I like. So for example, I think Who's Next is a far superior album to Tommy because the songs are just better. And I don't really care that much about the concept of Tommy. I might have cared if I was around when it came out, but like to me, the songs on Who's Next are so superior. I think Revolver is a much better album than Sergeant Pepper's because the songs are better. I think The River could have been a great single disc, and Bruce, he didn't quite ruin it, but by having songs like "Ooh Ooh, I've Got a Crush on You" on there, it really takes away the impact from songs like Point Blank, or
Mhm.
Fade Away or Independence a Day. And so I really do listen to songs, and it's also something you mentioned about me. I care a lot about the lyrics, which is not as much for you. Is that correct?
Well, I would not say I don't care about them, but it's not what grabs me initially, for the most part. Usually it is the music, the instruments, whatever the music is. And if I like that, I will typically delve into the lyrics after after the fact. I can't think of any instance where hearing a song or an album for the first time uh, and I was grabbed by the lyrics. Like that's what pulled me in. I mean, it's certainly part of the package, but it's not
It's
the
harder
main point.
if you don't know the lyrics, and so you're listening for the first time. That it's hard to be as grabbed by them as opposed to when you've listened to it. The music, obviously it's easy to just hear that and get that. But like for me, like the artists I really like why I like the Beatles or the Stones or Dylan or Neil Young or Bruce or whatever, really has to do with the writing. And obviously the music is obviously part of the package. You can't have one without the other. It's both
Mhm.
things. But
Otherwise, you'd be a fan of poetry.
yes, exactly. And
Who
that,
fucking
but that,
who
that
fucking likes poetry?
but I think rock and roll is poetry set to music, you know?
Exactly. Without the music, forget it. Are you going to be listening to records full of poetry with no music?
Well, I do like poetry, but since this is not a podcast about poetry, we'll
You
just
didn't
stick
answer
to
my question though.
okay, say it again.
Would you listen to a record of just poetry
Oh, of like
without music?
yeah, it just like I would listen to an audiobook. It would depend on who was doing the narration.
Yeah.
And I would be super picky about that, just the way I am with audiobooks. Like, and so once again, same way with music and words with an audiobook, it's the book itself, plus it's who's doing the narration. It could be a great book, but if it's the voice you don't hear, then it's terrible. Or it could be a great voice, but it's a lousy book. And so and that's why I've mentioned Firewater to you before, old 97s. The reason that I like them is the very clever wordplay. In particular old 97s, what Rhett Miller, the lead singer and main writer, does. He has a lot of Easter eggs in his songs, and it's fun to sort of try to find them and figure them out. And he actually does a thing. I don't know if you're familiar with Stage It, but artists do concerts online from their homes, and you can watch it for $5 or $10 live. And I got hooked on it during the pandemic because couldn't see live music, couldn't go out anywhere and all. And it was fun watching Rhett play guitar, sing, and talk about how like this Easter egg or that Easter egg, or what made him write this song or that song, or and that sort of thing. And I find that really interesting. And that could be true with instrumental music as too, too. But again, it's when I hear a certain verse or a certain wordplay, I'm like, oh man, that's so clever, you know.
And when I do actually notice it,
Yeah,
I really appreciate it for sure. And if I find the lyrics to be good, meaningful, whatever, they resonate with me for music that I've already come to like, then that's just the whole package. And
right,
that's the best stuff ever. And to your point about some of those bands you mentioned, Air, excuse me, Stereo Lab. So those are good examples because Stereolab, all the lyrics are in French too, or probably 90% of them are.
okay,
A couple
yeah,
songs in English. The main singer is a French woman, and so yeah, I don't know what the fuck they're singing about most of the time. Most of the time, same with Air. Air has
right.
a few songs in English as well, but it doesn't deter me from absolutely loving both of those bands.
No, and you can, and I certainly can too. But it's something like going back to the river, where there's a line in the river where Bruce sings, "Is a dream a lie if it don't come true, or is it something
Mm-hmm.
worse that sends me down to the river?" And it's such a clever way
Sure.
to go back into that, and
Yeah,
it's stuff like that's the stuff that really hooks me. Um,
yeah. I get it. I
you know,
get it. You're much more of a literary fan than I
yeah,
am in general. I know you read a lot more than I do, and it makes sense that you focus more on lyrics. That's just in your DNA, I think.
yeah, and so I think it's really different the way you and I listen to music. And there are even very little things that I particularly like in a song title. For example, like there's a Blondie song called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," and which is my favorite Blondie song. And I love that it's "I'm always touched by your presence, comma, dear." Like you don't usually see a comma in a song title, you know? A- And
uh, that's funny.
and
So I
Squeeze is another band where I just love the lyrics.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Elvis Costello.
Um, I was just watching something on YouTube. It was, have you ever seen on YouTube? It's what's it's called. It's a series called "What's in My Bag,"
No,
and it's done by Amoeba Records in LA. And when well-known musicians come in and are shopping, they grab them, take them into the back room, and shoot a little video of them with all the records they picked out on their trip to Amoeba. And it's really pretty fascinating, especially as a big music fan like you
yeah,
are.
no,
It
I'm
would be
curious.
right up your alley.
Yeah,
And one of the recent ones I just watched the other day, I forget who it was with. One of the records the guy picked out was East Side Story by Squeeze,
yeah.
and he was just singing the praises of Squeeze, like kept saying they were basically the late '70s and early '80s Beatles.
They were
He was
definitely
just,
influenced heavily by the Beatles.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And,
for
and,
sure.
and East Side Story is a good album, but like something like Argy Bargy, British for argument, is a fantastic album. And again, it's because of the lyrics. There's a line where he sings, "Singles remind me of kisses, albums remind me of plans," and I think that's so clever, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and,
I concur.
and I think also that there's another difference is because you're listening to vinyl for the most part, and I'm
Mhm.
streaming.
No, not for the most part.
Okay, well, you do listen to CDs occasionally.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Okay,
I guess I do,
okay,
but it's like 99% versus
vinyl.
1%.
Okay, and I'm listening to 95%, 98% streaming, and maybe 2% CDs.
Yeah.
And so
I'm
I'm much.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm much more likely to say play this song or play that song, as opposed to, and I do occasionally say play this album or play that album, but for the most part, I'm saying play this song or play that song.
So that's part of the way music listening has shifted with
Absolutely,
the
huge
advent of
shift.
streaming,
Yep,
and that's been going on for a long time.
yep. And at first, I
But
was against it actually. So
well, and I was going to say to somebody of your caliber falling
yeah,
into that trap, I'm
yeah.
quite disappointed in you, Ken.
Yes, and I really resisted it like a wave, and so I would always say like play, this album or play that album. And I still sometimes do. But then I realized, look, I'm in the mood for this song or that song. And there are a lot of bands where there are a lot of albums, like for example, The River. I don't want to listen to Ooh, I've Got a Crush on You or Ramrod if I don't have to. I want to move along. And I can just tell my device skip, skip ahead, and it'll just skip to the next song.
And I get it, and I really could give a shit how anybody listens to music and what format, et cetera, et cetera. I've just invested in how I do it and
Yep.
how I enjoy it. And going back to your initial comment about how I listen to music and perhaps am more focused on the music side, which this is a perfect example of that being true. Is my favorite artist of all time, music artist, is Ennio Morricone,
Okay.
and he's, for those who don't know, but not to insult anyone, he's a guy who did about 500 soundtracks. He's the greatest film composer of all time, hands down. And I have a million of his records, and they're almost all instrumental. And that's one of the biggest chunks of things I listen to. But like I probably have at least 100 albums by him, and so yes, I am listening to stuff all the time that doesn't even have lyrics, doesn't
Right.
even have singing,
Yep.
and it's just as rewarding for me, if
No, no question.
maybe even more so. You
And
know,
choose something like from the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it's such a well-known, certain songs are so well known that it's like there's certain hooks that are like lyrics because they're so memorable, where you can just like hear it
yes,
in your head. um
the whistling and stuff
yeah,
like that.
exactly. So I'm curious though, let's say there must be the occasional album where you do like four of the songs on side one or whatever, and you really don't care for one or two of the others. When those come on, you're saying you don't move the needle. Do you leave the room? Do you start doing something else?
No, I neither.
Okay.
Oftentimes, if I'm listening to music, it might be on in the background when like I've mentioned, when I'm cooking or
Right.
whatever, or reading the paper, whatever.
Yep.
Um, but in that case, or if I'm just sitting there in front of the stereo doing nothing else but listening, I will never skip a song.
Got it.
I just the way albums are made, I look at those as just one piece of art, and to skip through it is doing a disservice to what went into making that record.
And I think I felt the same way once upon a time. I
Mm-hmm.
would have made it akin to skipping a chapter in a book, and I don't feel that way anymore. And I'm not sure how much I'm sure switching to streaming has been a big part of my shift, but I don't think it's the only thing. Um, but it's sort of like if I'm sitting there and listening to Rubber Soul and Michelle comes on, like I just don't want to hear it, and so I'm gonna just tell the device to skip ahead so I don't have to hear it. Or
I
or
get it.
or if I can like walk over to the stereo. One of the things I also like is I was listening to Penthouse by Luna the other day, and I actually had it on my TV on Spotify, and then the lyrics scroll for every song. And then so then
Well, that's
like
kind of fun.
and so that's really like, oh, that's because sometimes there's like, what was that line, because you just can't catch it no matter how many times you've heard the song. Like if you could ever heard the song Written on the Back of My Hand by the Jags, I defy you to tell me what the lyrics are. I've heard the song 5,000 times and I can't tell what the lyrics are because of his accent. um but
And you can't find them online.
I could, and I just haven't, but because I'm always trying to like, let me give it one more try. But it is fun to like watch the lyrics as you go by. I don't usually do it, but it is interesting. And I will say there are certain albums where it's a combination. Like I said, with Sergeant Pepper's, I don't really care about the concept. With Tommy, I don't really care about the concept. With Wish You Were Here, I do. I think it really works well. Each song stands on its own, and the whole album works together. And so I wouldn't skip songs on that album, but that for me is a rarity.
Huh. Huh.
Um,
Yeah,
I,
I guess I've just never progressed past what it was like when I initially started buying records at 8 years old. And ever since then, it's just been the way I've listened, and I've never thought about doing it otherwise. And I'm sure if I was embracing streaming as far as a way to listen to my music, I'm sure I would be doing the same thing that you're talking about.
and remember, as I mentioned before, I think it was episode 2 of Track Records. If you want to go back there and catch up, is that I started by going to a record store in Cambridge and often buying 45s.
Hmm.
And so I was already listening to songs as opposed to, I mean, I was buying albums as well, but I was buying a lot of 45s.
Do you remember the first 45 you ever bought with your own money?
That's
Like,
interesting.
not, you didn't get it for Christmas,
I,
or
I do
somebody didn't buy it for you.
I do remember the first album I ever bought, which was from a yard sale my sister and her best friend were having when I was like, I don't know, 7 years old. And I bought a used copy of Magical Mystery Tour for 50 cents. So I do
Your
remember this.
sister just wouldn't give it to you.
No, no. Well, because she was doing it with her friend Barbara. And so like I think like that, she couldn't do that. Not that she would have anyway, but I do remember that quite clearly. The first 45 I bought, and then actually my brother's wife's sister gave me a bunch of 45s. So I was listening to Strangers in the Night by Sinatra. I was listening to Psychotic Reaction by the Count Five. I had all these
Oh,
very
didn't they tour together?
yes, exactly. There was a package store, one of the Murray the K tours. Um, it definitely would have been a an early 60s, something like Hunter Gets Captured by the Game by the Marvelettes, or or Double Shot of My Baby's Love by the Swinging Medallions. Are You a Boy, Are You a Girl by the Barbarians. It would definitely have been, maybe it was Dirty Water by the Standells. It would have been one of those, sort of one hit wonder bands from the early 60s.
Hmm.
And so I bought all of them, but I can't tell you which one was the first one. That I just don't remember.
Yeah.
Whenever I'd go to I'd show up at the record store, they would start recognizing me. They're like, oh great, this is the guy who's going to make us go search through our 90,000 45s to find the one he wants, because they were not the most well organized store, I will say.
I
Um,
can't imagine that.
and then at one point I also my sister's boyfriend at the time was working at another record store. This is much later. I'm in college now, and the owner of the store had his own personal collection of 15,000 records, and he had a ton of like rare albums, bootlegs. And so it actually I don't remember what our deal was. I paid him, and he would tape stuff for me. And so I was listening to cassettes a lot. Not by that was my preferred choice of method, but it was because I all sorts of cool stuff I couldn't get otherwise. I was always a fan of bootlegs. I was always been searching when I go record shopping at used record stores. A lot of times it was for boots, which was tough because they were expensive. But like I had the bootleg of the Doors in Miami, that the one that Morrison got busted for. That
Yeah.
was one of my favorites. Early Springsteen, where he's doing if Jesus was the sheriff and I was the priest, or the promised, songs you couldn't find anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. If you grew up in the 70s, excuse me, just a second.
Yeah,
If you were a record collector in the 70s and 80s, you definitely, like, if you were hardcore, bootlegs were a big deal.
that was the thing then. Yeah. Did you ever collect bootlegs as well?
Oh, I have a million.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So
Literally 1 million.
yes,
Yeah, no, I have a ton. And to your point, they were super expensive,
that was
and
the problem.
they were so hit and miss too. You
Yeah.
could end up
Yes.
getting with probably 50% of them were the worst sounding,
Yep.
shitty audience tape recording that you could possibly
And you just
imagine.
spend a bunch of money on. Yep.
Oh, you spent $40 on
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
and it's the Who at Carlton Football Stadium in
Yeah.
1974
Yeah.
after Who by Numbers was released, and you're excited to get it. It
Yep.
shows up in the mail. I living in Walla Walla. I would order them from record
Okay.
stores in New York City,
Got it. Yep.
and back then, and then it would take sometimes like 6 weeks
Right.
before it show up, and it was like Christmas when they did, and just more often than not, it was just utter disappointment.
Yeah, because like even if you listen to an actual released album, like the Stones' first live album, got Live If You Want It, it's
Hmm.
just a bunch of girls screaming their heads off. Like you can
Yeah,
barely
yeah,
hear the Stones, and that was a released album. And so
yeah.
so a lot of the bootlegs were,
That was how it was back then, though.
yeah.
The mid '60s, same with that Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah, you can't hear anything.
Yeah,
And
those
as
are
opposed
awful.
by the time Live at Leeds comes out, then it's good. It's great. Um,
Yeah, the recording quality techniques progress so quickly. When you think about that,
yeah,
that was a span of like 5 years.
it's two track,
Nothing.
4 track, 8 track, and like it's a 16 track, mono stereo. Yeah. Um,
It's we're fortunate as music fans that it progressed that quickly because you can go back and listen to all these great sounding live records starting from the late 60s, really,
yep. And
of our
also
favorite bands.
the change from having a bunch of filler on an album, having one or two songs, then the rest is filler.
Hmm.
And that really changed. And that you got to give a lot of credit to the Beatles and the Stones for no, we're going to make albums. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
you know,
Because even their first few records for both of them, and even the Kinks or the Who for that matter, their
yep,
first few records have
yep,
lots of filler.
a ton of filler. You know, and so and that's also what impressed me. Like later on, after Born to Run, Springsteen felt so much pressure for Darkness. It took him that in the lawsuit he was fighting at the time with Mike Appel, but it took him 3 years to release Darkness on the Edge of Town. And the Beatles and Stones were releasing 3 albums a year, never mind
Yeah,
one every 3 years. So
I miss those days where artists actually were putting out good record after good record year after year. In fact, there are a couple doing it in this day and age, believe it or not, of bands that I really like and that I follow. In fact, more than a record a year. Guided by Voices.
okay, they've put out so many albums, it is insane. I have some friends who are just crazy Guided by Voices fans and go and follow them and see them wherever they play. And they actually
Mhm.
got Kim and I to go to a concert here, and it was at this terrible place where it was an outdoor concert. We were in the way back. It was really hard to hear, but I also like I've listened to them and they're fine. I remember listening to B thousand, I think it was called, which was the one they were touring behind at the time. And they're fine, but there's nothing that grabs me about them. But how many albums have they released? Like it's ridiculous.
Um,
Yeah,
Including the main guy's solo records and
yeah,
a couple of the other band members, over 100.
yeah. I mean, easy.
And
Yeah,
the thing that's so unusual about what I find so unusual about them is that at this day and age, they're on about their fourth, maybe fifth lineup. The one mainstay is the front man, Robert Pollard.
yep.
And this group he had, the backup, I shouldn't call him backup band, but the band he has now have been together since 2017.
Okay.
And what's so impressive to me is that they're putting out their best records of their entire history right now, starting in 2017. Since then, they put out either two or three every year, and they're all of a good, high quality. The caliber of them is good just because they're putting out so many.
Yeah.
It's not like they're just putting out shit.
It,
And I like them all, I
it,
gotta say.
okay. And I would ask you what songs you particularly like on one of them, but we've already been
Oh,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but
Their titles in particular are super obtuse or oblique, obscure.
yeah,
They're just it's. I think he titles his songs by he just picks a couple random words, at least a lot of them, a
yeah,
couple random words, and throws them together. And oftentimes they have nothing to do with the song lyrics. The lyrics themselves are oftentimes, or most of the time, seemingly nonsensical, but they somehow work in the con- context of the music.
and I will go and give that a listen. But and I could believe that could be true of a few songs or a couple albums. It's hard to believe it could be true of that many albums released per year, as opposed to like when the Talking Heads did E Zimbra, where all the lyrics are just made up. But that was just and it was great. But it's one song. Um,
Well, and I should say I'm speaking for him. Maybe they're not just nonsensical
sure.
lyrics. Maybe they're much more meaningful to him and or have some deep meaning that is just lost on me.
Yeah. No.
I don't
Yeah.
know,
Right.
but it doesn't matter to me because
Sure.
I like the lyrics. Like the lyric sheets are included with all the records, and I'll take a look at them. And yeah, they're unlike any other lyrics in the sense that you don't know what the fuck he's talking about, and you don't know if he's like pulling the wool over our eyes and just like, here, I'm just gonna throw out some shit, and it doesn't matter if it's meaningless. It's who knows, who
But
knows.
but imagine like a writer you really like writing like 2 or 3 books a year? I mean, it's so odd. Or
Well,
were you ever in a band? If like one of the bands you were in, can you imagine if like, okay, let's get back in the studio and release another album? And it's like, we just did that 2 months ago, you know?
well, that's why I'm so impressed
Yeah,
by it, because I do know how much work goes into making an album, and to see how much they're putting out. And again, in my opinion, the quality remains high. I
right.
think it's their best records. Do you remember a country artist named Bobby Bear?
Yes.
Um, so
60s.
60s, 70s,
Yep.
great country artist, by the
Yep.
way. His son, Bobby Bear Jr., is part of the latest incarnation of Guided by Voices. But anyway, a couple others I wanted to mention in the same breath as
Yep.
Guided by Voices as being extremely prolific. And I don't think you're super familiar with. There's this Australian band of these young, they're probably in their early 30s at this point, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
No.
You know them? Have
Do
you
not
heard of
know them.
them?
No.
Okay, so
I've
they're
barely heard
another
of
band.
Australia.
Sorry.
I've barely heard of Australia.
They're in the same boat as Guided by Voices for me. They're super prolific. They're super experimental in the sense that they try different genres from record to record, and off some years they'll put out 3 full length LPs in one year. They're touring like crazy all the time, and the quality is always very good. They'll put out a punk record. They'll put out something that is like a synth pop record. So they're not afraid to experiment, and they do it really well. I guess is the bottom line. If they're doing all that and the music sucked, who cares? You're just
Right.
throwing a bunch of shit
Right. And
over
see
the
what
wall,
sticks.
and
Yeah.
it's shit. Yeah. Um, and so they're another one, and there's one more contemporary band that's doing the same sort of thing. They're a band called OCs. Do you know them?
Yeah.
So they change the spelling of their name all the time. It could be OHSEES. So OCs,
Right.
or OC, or the letter O, letter CS, or anyway, that doesn't really matter. That's immaterial. But they, again, put out about 3 records a year, 2 to 3 a year, from hardcore punk records to proggy punk records, all really good.
And so for all three bands, who's releasing these albums?
So King Gizzard puts them out on their own
Okay.
label. Oh,
Which
and
makes, okay.
in fact, another thing that's really interesting about them that I should have mentioned is that they put out so much product that they will post the masters of their recordings on a site somewhere, and they welcome people to come in, grab the masters, and press their own records
Nice.
from their masters without
Yep.
charging them.
Yep.
So
Nice.
there's this huge. I wonder if it's similar to the way that the Grateful Dead has such a huge underground
Yeah. Because the Grateful
of
Dead had the taping section at their concerts,
yeah. So it's
whereas set up for people to tape. So,
right, and people are pressing records from those tapes,
yep.
and I don't know if it's exactly the same, but that's a pretty unusual thing for them to do.
Yep.
It's so you'll see all kinds of random crazy pressings of various records of theirs. But they also have their own label, which I guess is the de facto King Gizzard
and
label.
and that makes it easy to put out as many albums as you want.
Sure.
How about Guided by Voices?
Same thing.
Okay, so
They
then that
have
makes
their own
sense.
label, and
I mean,
same thing with OCs.
there you go. Imagine telling Capitol or Warner or Asylum or whoever, "Hey, we want to put out 3 albums a year." You know,
Well, if it was somebody who was shifting units like a Taylor Swift, they would be
right?
more than happy to comply.
How many
But these
artists are like that these days? Like that,
oh
you know?
one
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
and I hesitate calling her an artist, but Yeah, so I would imagine they sell, a couple 100,000 records for each of their main releases.
Right.
I don't know, I'm just assuming, but they're all very popular bands in the sense of they could play a place like, I'm trying to think of somewhere in Austin. I don't know the venues in Austin, but in
Well, how about
Seattle,
Seattle? Yeah.
like any of them would, or let's see, King Gizzard and Guided by Voices. King Gizzard would play and fill the Paramount, which is probably a 3,000
Okay.
seater.
No, that's something that's impressive. Okay.
And they're only getting more and more popular. Like when they tour and play in Colorado, they play at Red Rocks.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
Because I
Guided
would
by
have guessed
Voices.
like a 400 person club. So that's impressive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're the OCs would play somewhere like the Showbox in Seattle,
Okay.
which is 1,200 or whatever.
Even that.
Um, Same and Guided by Voices, probably Showbox, maybe the Moore Theater, which is about a 2,000
Okay.
seater, I think. So they're not chump change.
Yeah. No.
These guys all make a decent living, and I think that probably factors in to them putting out so much product
Right. No, I
because it
mean, I've
makes them
definitely
money.
during South by, there were times where Kim and I would go to see a band and there'd be four people there. And then even if the band was bad, we didn't want to leave because like, we were half the
Because
audience.
I can see you
Yeah,
leave.
exactly. So,
Yeah, I
so
understand that. I've been on the wrong end of that stick many times.
and and actually there was even one though where it was a band we really liked and they're called Uncle Bad Touch and they're from Montreal and they're punky and it's a trio and we really liked them but uh, no one else got them. um
Yeah,
so but check them out. They're really interesting. But yeah, it must be brutal when you're on stage and there's like three people in the audience and one of them is like your brother or your girlfriend or
yeah.
yeah.
It's pursuing music. That's further or the best example of how it's such a labor of love
Sure, it has to be.
because it's humiliating. It's deflating. It's depressing. Um, you put so much of your heart and soul into creating something, and when it just doesn't get any sort of response or way less response than you would hope, it's bad.
Yeah,
It really is.
yeah, no, it must feel awful, especially if you think, I don't get it. This stuff is really good.
Yeah, and the, it's not like that's really going through your head at the time.
Yeah,
I think if you keep going for any amount of time, that's just implicit that you think what you're doing is worthy
sure.
and it keeps you going. And that's how you can sustain playing shows on a Tuesday night in Johnsonville, Tennessee for four drunks and one guy who's nodding out on heroin,
And
on a bench.
then getting back in the Econoline van with all
Yeah.
your bandmates and
Yes. And then
driving all
driving
night.
to the next shithole.
Yeah.
But that's
The only thing
the
harder, I think, would be being a stand-up comic because then you're out there alone when you're first starting. You know,
Yeah, but at least you don't have to tear down gear at
that's true.
2 in the morning after four other shitty bands have
But
played, and you have to wait until they're done before you can tear down. You could
that
just grab your jacket and leave.
that's true. On the other hand, though, people, even if the band's bad, people don't usually yell "you suck" at a band the way they will at a comic.
Yeah,
Yeah, but so they each have to, okay,
not always.
okay. I have never ever yelled at a band "you suck" ever.
Yeah, no, and in fact,
If I don't clap, that is as far as I go. You know,
I've never been on the receiving end of that,
yeah.
to be honest.
And I've
But
never yelled out Judas when a
um,
or Freebird. So.
yeah, yeah. Boy, that's funny when people yell out Freebird at a show. That's one of the funniest things I've ever witnessed in my life.
It is bizarre. So, um, but yeah, no, that's a tough life. And it must be very rewarding when you do make it, but it must be tough when you're like finally okay, we've tried this for 8 years. Like, and people, and I don't think everyone quits at once. You would know better than me, but it's probably one person at a time.
It's varied for me
Okay.
from different bands, and also just to confirm, it's not like every show I've ever played was like that. I mean,
Right,
those
right.
those are mixed in with some really great things, like
Sure.
playing in front of like 3,000 people at Bumbershoot in a completely packed. It's it's called the Sky Church stage at the EMP Rock and Roll Museum in Seattle. You know, on a prime Saturday afternoon,
That must
where
be a
the
huge
place is
rush.
just, yeah, it's there's nothing like it. It's, you know, the polar opposite of what we were just talking about,
Mm.
and those are the little gems that keep you going, you
Yeah,
know.
I totally get that. And a lot of times why professional athletes don't want to retire. They don't want to give
Yes,
that up, And like and it must be weird to go from like people screaming for you and cheering for you to like,
just
just
being
walking down the
another
street and yeah,
dipshit on the
and
couch
people
watching.
ignoring you. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is funny because every time somebody like Tom Brady comes back or whoever, Jordan,
Yeah.
people are constantly saying, "Why would you come back? Why
Yeah.
you went out on top? Why
Yep.
would you come back?"
And
They just, you don't get it unless you're in their shoes.
yeah, and then look at the Stones. Like whatever we think of them nowadays, it does it like it's like they don't want to give that up. Obviously, they're not doing it for money. I mean, they might be, but like they've got plenty of money. It's not, that can't be the only driving force. I think someone like Mick would. I don't know if he'd do it for free, but I don't think money's the thing that's driving him. I think it's adulation.
Yes, I would think so. You can only spend so much money, and you just got to assume that all of those guys have more money than they'll
Yeah,
ever be able to spend in
yeah,
their remaining 4 years or whatever they
yeah,
have. Although I bet Mick goes till he's 100. The way he takes care of himself,
yeah,
and the conditioning and everything, I can only assume he's going to be one
yeah.
of those 104-year-old
It,
Englishmen.
and it's the same thing when Bruce started working out before Born in USA, before that tour, because he was like, I want to do this for a long time, and
Mhm.
and you can't do that if you're Meatloaf, or
Case
even
in point.
or even Leslie West, you know.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I remember Bruce talking about when he started working out. He was claiming to live on a diet of cheeseburgers, you know, and fast food up until that point. And